So the next part of the login system, we now have got the validation from the previous video, shows you how to validate that the user has actually entered something in the staff ID and the password. And what we're going to do now is actually check using SQL and then VBA coding to check the record set, to check the actual table in the background and see if there's a match for the username and password before we actually proceed on to the next stage of the sequence of code. So we'll go back to our database and you can see we've got our validation, we haven't put in passwords. So nothing's actually happened when I go to login. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you how to create the code to connect and read off the back of the data table. So we're going to check entry against data table. So the first thing in this is we want to take the two values that come from the text box, so the two values that the user has entered in, we want to store them in variables. Then we want to take the variables and check them against, using SQL, check them against the record set to see if the actual match, and if they match, the record count should show 1, and if they don't match, the record count should show 0. So if there's a match 1, we can then put in another function to move to the next stage, and if it's 0, we can exit sub. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to actually declare variables. I'm just going to put caps locks in. So I'll put a little message in just to declare variables. And different programs use different ways of declaring variables. In VBA it's called the dim. So dim, and the first one we're going to have is the staff ID, and we're just going to give it a different name because in the field name staff ID, the text box that's in the login form is txt staff ID. So we're going to call this get staff ID as string, because they're string, they're actual text. Even though they might be numbers, they're actually stored as text. We're going to dim get password as string, and then we're also going to store the connection to the database in a variable. So we're going to get dim db as database and dim rs as a DAO direct access object dot record set. So it's going to be rs is going to be your record set, db is going to be your database, and the last one then is, because we're reading off the record count, we want to actually have a variable to store the value if it's going to be 0 or 1. So dim cnt as an integer. So you'll see the different coding now that we're starting to get into. First thing we want to do is store staff ID from the text box. So we're taking what somebody has entered into the text box for staff ID and we're storing it in the variables get staff ID, and the same for the password. So get staff ID d equals me dot txt staff ID, get password equals me dot txt password. And then below that, what we want to do now is store the database. So it's set db, because we're setting the database, same with the record set. So we're setting the database equals to current db, and that basically sets it. Once we have set the database, what a lot of programmers do in all programming languages, when you're setting something into a variable, is to clear the variable. So we're going to have db.close, so we're closing the database at the end of the sequence, and then we're setting the variable equal to nothing, so it's saying there's nothing in it. So to connect now, we'll connect the database to the current database You can also connect variables to different connections like ADODB connections on a server if databases are stored in a server. So for this, we're just looking at the back end tables that's in the current database, and it's from them the staff ID the tables, the TBL staff table we're going to actually store as a record set. So we're going to set rs equals db dot open record set, and that opens the record set, and I'm going to use some SQL code here. So I always use, and it's just selection SQL code, so we're only reading off it. You can have SQL code to update, delete, all of them sort of things. So using VBA, we're going to use a simple command to select all the records from the staff table. If we go to the staff table, and you'll see there's the different records, and we'll just use the first ID 1, 2, 3. So you'll see there's 5 numbers for each of them and the password. So we're going to go to staff ID and then its password. So select all, which is a star, from TBL staff where staff ID, which is the name of the field for staff, equals, and because we're actually using a string, we'll have to use an apostrophe surrounds a string. If it's a number, you don't need the apostrophe. If it's or an integer variable, you don't need the apostrophe. And if it's a date, you would use a hash. So we're actually going to have an apostrophe. Because we're bringing in the variable, we're going to close the statement, and then we're going to get staff ID, which is the variable, the ampersand to open it again, and then we're going to open the statement. And because we have an apostrophe at the start of the variable, we're going to have an apostrophe at the end of it. We're just going to check this before we actually then try the password as well. So we're going to set the count, CNT, which is an integer, equals rs dot record count. And what's very good in VBA is if you have your variables or your different controls names, you can actually hit a dot and it'll bring up a list of all the different components. So rs dot record count, at the end I'm going to have my rs dot close, and make sure to have it before you close the database, and set rs equals to nothing. If the staff ID exists, it should be 1, and if the staff ID doesn't exist, it should be 0. So we'll see. So we'll try 2. So we'll try one that's staff ID like this. So no, it should actually get staff ID equals, sorry, take out that, only set because the database and the record set are component. So you'll see you've not entered password, enter a password, and it isn't working. But I can check why it isn't working. Oh, it is working. I haven't actually done anything to say what the count is, so I'm just going to put a simple message box and an exit sub to say what the count is. So it was actually doing something, but I wasn't showing it, so I'm going to put in anything for the staff ID and a password. So you'll see it's not. If I put the staff ID in as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you'll see it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Again, it's 1. So anything that's not in the staff table will show 0. We can now go back to the code and see if we can match the password as well. And again, we're going to go back to the SQL code and delete out the bracket and the last inverted commas. And we're going to use an AND statement. and it'll basically, you can use and or, and it'll continue on the statement. And this time we're going to have the S password, which is the field we're looking in the table staff. S password, so whatever is stored in S password, go back, S password equals, and again because it's a string, we have our apostrophe, end the statement and bring in the string variable, get password, and close the statement. So if we just check through the table to see one that matches, 1 2 3 4 5, and it's password 1. So if I go log in 1 2 3 4 5, type in password 1, hey, you get a 1 return. Put in the wrong password, you get a 0 return. So correct password, you'll get a 1 return, and the wrong password, you'll get a 0 return. Password 1, and you get a 1 return. Back to my code now. Now I know that that's working. I can now go in and put a little alert and exit subs. So take out my message box and that. I'm going to then continue on here with a little selection, and basically as an if then else. So if CNT equals 0, then I'm going to go down here and put me end if. If it equals 0, then message box wrong username and or password, and you can go then to wrong username or password, and you can then either use something like me.txt staff id dot set focus equals, or set focus would be, so that would set the focus to the staff id. If you wanted, you could actually have me.txt staff id equals, and that would delete out anything that's in them text boxes. At the moment I'm just going to leave them the same. So brings up an alert message. You could have similar to what we had in the Outlook, where it's me.txt staff id dot border color equals VB red, and me.txt staff id password equals dot border color equals VB red, and here we're going to have an exit sub. So it's going to exit out of the actual code. I'm just going to put a simple else in here now, because the next video I'm going to show you then how you're going to open up the and filter the dashboard for the specific user. So exit sub, and then in this here I'm just going to put a simple message box for testing. Congratulations, or success exit. Right, and I'm going to go back now, close my form and test it. Login, I'm going to go 1 2 3 4 5, password 1, and you'll see success is coming up. Put in the wrong password, wrong username and or password, and it's set the properties of the text boxes, the border color to red. In the next video then, what we're going to be doing is actually now continuing on from where this little message box, we now are successful. It's returned 1. What do we wanted to do? We want to open dashboard and filter record or filter staff. So we're going to open the dashboard and filter staff ID.